Hello YouTube, StuckInAPool here, and today we're going to be talking about some more Fire Emblem Heroes stuff, specifically the power of enemy phase units. So I'm going to talk about why I like them and why I use them, how strong they can be, and why I think you should give them a try as well. So what is the point of an enemy phase unit? Basically, they are units that are built to bait enemy units in by sitting at the edge of their attack range, and then hopefully retaliating and then defeating them all in the same turn. These units tend to be slow and sturdy, and they utilize defensive boosted specials to deal the majority of their damage. However, very fast units can do this job as well, as long as they can survive a hit and then double and hopefully kill the enemy that attacks them. So what are the strengths of enemy phase units? Well, first of all, since you don't have to go out of position to attack an enemy and you let them come to you one by one, you don't need to run a dancer to help get your unit out of danger after it initiates. And the nice thing about not having to use a dancer is, for one thing, it frees up a slot, and also you don't get the BST penalty that they receive, which would lower your overall arena score, assuming you're in arena. And you don't have to worry about wasting a B slot for your skills like hit and run and drag back. As good as those skills are, for enemy phase units you don't have to worry about it. Also, the most common units to be run as enemy phase units are armored units, and of course while armored units suffer the low mobility, it doesn't really hurt them too much, since they don't have to be moving around a whole lot. And these units also give you the highest arena scores because of their higher base stat totals. On top of that, they have access to the most premium enemy phase skill, Vengeful Fighter. Another nice thing about them is that they can function pretty well even with low investment. If you just give a unit Quick Riposte 2 and either Bonfire or Iceberg and maybe a killer weapon, then you got a unit that can take a lot of punishment and dish out a lot of damage. Alternatively, some of the best premium skills are good fits for enemy phase units as well. Steady Breath and Quick Riposte 3 and Aether all together is probably one of the most deadly combinations in Arena right now, especially if your unit has built-in distant counter, like your Lightning Breath Dragons or your Ikes. And with enemy phase units, it's really easy to huddle them together and stack up in combat buffs, like your Spurs and your Drives, and your Wards and Goads for Emblem teams. That's why Ward Armor is so popular. So I'm not going to skip over the shortcomings of enemy phase units. They have some weaknesses. First of all, you don't get to see the combat outcome like you would if you were to initiate, whereas you might know your unit's going to die if you're initiating and you can see it. You have no way of really knowing that if you just are baiting a unit. Also, if you're not paying close attention, it's easy to get caught out by a dancer or Wings of Mercy or Guidance shenanigans. And you basically have to calculate how the outcome of a fight will go before you place a unit in your enemy's range. And you have to be extra mindful of weird dancer interactions, like a unit moving out of place to rally, getting in range of a dancer, and then suddenly being able to reach a unit you didn't expect that they could. Specifically speaking of Guidance, just as an example, I was playing an arena a couple days ago and I didn't realize that a flyer on the enemy team had the Guidance seal, and Winter Tharja warped 4 spaces across the map, took out my Alphonse. Poor guy has enough trouble as it is. And the other big issue you can run up against on enemy phase teams are when enemy units have Firesweep weapons. Firesweep Lyn and Cordelia in particular can be a real hassle. And just as a side note, if you're going to be using enemy phase units, I would always make sure you have the enemy attack range highlighter on. You can change that in the settings. But always double check when you're putting your ally in enemy range, because it might be easy to think you're only putting them in range of one specific enemy, and maybe if you didn't notice, another enemy can reach them as well. So always just be mindful. Okay, so I'm going to go through and talk a little about what weapons and skills I think are the best fits for enemy phase units, and weapons and skills that I think you could give a try if you want to make these units work well. So typically the best fit and one of the easier to access weapons now with the weapon refinery are slaying weapons, because like I said, these units often rely on specials to do a lot of damage, and with slaying weapons it just makes it easier to put out more special attacks. Next we have the Xmas Weapons. Obviously they're limited time. It might be kind of hard to justify inheriting them away, but that extra 2 to all stats during enemy phase could really come in handy. And then next we have the weapons that have built-in distant counter, your unique weapons like Ragnall and Stout Tomahawk and Lightning Breath for dragons. This allows them to free up their A slot and run Steady Breath, which makes them super dangerous. And next we have the Guard Bow. It's a very unique weapon and really the only of its kind, and you can get it through the weapon refinery as well. Having built-in distant defense that can stack with the A skill and the S slot is crazy and a little silly and very effective. And we can't forget about the tome users. There aren't a whole lot of great options for them, but I still think the owl tomes are kind of slept on in theory. To be honest, I don't use them all that much, but I think with people like Bowie, if you were to give him close counter or just give him bow breaker or something like that and just put allies around him and let him bait physical units, he could just do it all day. As for the assists, I think the most common one you're going to see is if you're using Armor Emblem themes, pivot. But of course, reposition and swap are good as well. And also, since you're kind of going to keep your allies close together and be setting them up and maybe stacking spurs and drives and goads, then being able to rally them would be good as well. As for specials, I've already mentioned Iceberg and Bonfire. The thing is, if you have a slow unit, then you're going to need Quick Riposte and a slaying or killer weapon for this to work. Unless your unit's slow enough that they get doubled, in which case Quick Riposte on its own is probably good enough. Now if you have Quick Riposte and a slaying weapon and your unit is very slow and they'll get doubled, you could go with Ignis and Glacies and just output even more damage. But if your unit's running a skill that also accelerates their cooldown, such as Heavy Blade or Steady Breath or Vengeful Fighter, then Aether is definitely not a bad idea. It'll help them do more damage and stay alive, which is great. Now if your unit's fast enough that they usually won't get doubled, and you just want to give them Quick Riposte, you could always run them with Moonbow or Glimmer just to increase their damage output a little more. Or if they're fast enough that they'll always be doubling, like the fast units I talked about earlier, then of course you don't have to worry about Quick Riposte. So next I'm going to get into the A, B, and C skill slots, and I'm kind of going to put these in order of most common to like most rare and premium and effective. So starting with your A skills, you have a lot of options here. You could just go with a stat boost, and I know it's not good for like arena scoring, but if you just want to give your unit a little more defense or a little more resistance, just so they can tank better, or for resistance like get off ploys better, or anything like that, then it's not a bad idea. Triangle Adept works well since you can kind of single out the units you want to fight a little better and lure them in, so that way you're getting more favorable matchups based on the weapon triangle. Fury works really well on enemy phase because it's increasing your defense, so you're going to take less damage in combat than you would have, and you may take the recoil damage after, but that recoil damage cannot kill you. So in theory, Fury does help you stay alive a little better. Technically the recoil damage with Fury does make it not synergize well with Quick and Riposte, but if you're not using any type of B skill that requires you to be at a health threshold, or if you're using one that wants you to be low health like Vantage, then Fury works well here. Next, the Fortress skills. They're not typically good because the attack penalty hurts you a lot more than the extra like 2 defense or resistance you would get as opposed to just using a stat boosting skill. But if your unit is basically 100% leaning on their defense and resistance boosted special, and they have very low attack, such as maybe like Felicia, then a Fortress skill works well. And then of course you have your stances. They're just like the stat boosts, but higher, and of course they only work on enemy phase, but that's what we're using here, so they would work well. Problem is they're pretty rare to come by still. And next we have the bonds. These are also rare to come by, but like I mentioned, enemy phase, it's easier to stack your allies together, so bonds work pretty well. Next we have distant defense and close defense. They're both obviously only enemy phase skills, just like the stances, but they add to both defense and resistance, so they're great. Next is distant counter and close counter, and I understand these skills are very rare and very premium. I mean, they're both distant counter only being available on Hector, and close counter only available on Takumi and now Winter Tharja. But if you're really devoted to building an enemy phase unit and you have an extra of these skills available, you should definitely consider it. Because like I mentioned in the beginning, you really want to be able to kill whoever's attacking you. Otherwise, you're going to have to waste your turn moving up to them and attacking them and leaving your unit in a position it doesn't necessarily want to be in. Because of the way the AI works, there's probably a unit that could kill your unit headed his or her way already. So if you had to put them out of position, it's going to be trouble for them. So if you can eliminate a threat before they have a chance to move to your other units or force your unit out of position, then it's going to help you a lot. Luckily there are other options besides using the A skill, so those are good units to lean on. And last we have Steady Breath, which is like the premier enemy phase A slot skill. Hopefully a resistance version comes out soon. I think that'd be great. And extra defense and cooldown charges come in handy, especially for units that really need that special to do damage. Moving on to B skills, there are quite a few options, but honestly, like 1 or 2 stand above the rest. So you could run Vantage. It's honestly a good skill. It's not going to help you on that first engagement and help you secure a kill like I was just talking about. But if your unit's going to have to fight multiple units, then it might help you out in a pinch, but I definitely wouldn't rely on it. Next we have Breakers, and while they come in handy, I wouldn't advise it unless your like Arena Core just has one specific type of unit that is really giving you issues. Like say you don't really have any units meant to handle axes well or something, you could just give a unit Axe Breaker and they could just bait all the axes you come across. Next we have Guard. I'm not going to talk about Guard a lot because I don't really use it very much, but I do know it's a pretty underrated skill, especially when you're fighting other units that really rely on their special to do damage. You can kind of force a stalemate with them, or you could force them to just not do any damage to you and allow yourself to build up a special while denying it on them. Either way, I'm just speaking in theory, I don't know much about it in practice. And next we have Cancel Affinity, just for those pesky Raven Tome mages. And the end all be all of the enemy phase skills is Quicken Riposte. It is the most common, and there's a reason. It's hard to beat it. If you're using a slow unit that wants to get doubled to build up their charge, Quicken Riposte allowing them to attack twice is just really, really valuable. Even if you're using like a medium to high speed unit, allowing them to duel units of similar speed and double them, I mean that's really good. And next we have Quicken Riposte on steroids, only available to armors, and that's Vengeful Fighter. So if you were lucky enough to get a couple Winter Tharges on the Winter Banner, then you definitely have some good tools to build up your armor team, to tank hits well and dish out a lot of retaliation. This way, if you're running an armor with a slaying weapon, you can give them Aether and just sit them on a defensive tile and just watch everything wail on them while they take little damage and just instantly recover it. It's kind of crazy. And moving on to the C skills, there aren't a lot of options here, but the ones we have all tend to work pretty well. First we have your Threatens, and I would typically advise Threaten Attack. Just helps you stay alive a little better. And I would just put these under units that you just never want to initiate with, and you would rather just sit them down next to an enemy and waste a turn, even if they're in attack range. That way they can get the Threaten off and lower the enemy's stat and force them to attack and then probably die. And with Threaten Attack, you're just going to take less damage, which is always nice. And then we have your Spurs and your Drives. Like I mentioned earlier, the enemy phase units are really good at huddling together and just makes these skills work well. And then for your units with high resistance and or high health, ploy skills are great. If you have a unit with high resistance that's also a physical unit, you can just give them defense ploy and then the attack ploy seal, so they're going to take less damage and dish out more punishment. Or if you have a unit with high health, then of course panic ploy is also good. You just have to be careful of how you position your allies, either at the start of the battle or before you want to get them into enemy range. So let's talk about a couple units that are really good at running enemy phase sets, and we're just going to do one of each color. So the first unit we're going to talk about is Adult Tiki. Good thing about her is she's easily available, and she comes with the weapon you want her to have. Just give her Lightning Breath Plus, upgrade it for defense, considering her defense is her strong point. Give her a good assist, and I would run Aether and Steady Breath if you can. If not, I would run Bonfire and Fortress Defense. Quicken Riposte, of course. And Threaten Attack works well on her. She doesn't quite have the health or resistance for any type of ploy. And with how much you see Brave Lens with Brave Bows, I would say Deflect Missile is a pretty good investment. Even though her defense is pretty high, it makes her a good Lend counter since obviously physical units with swords, axes, and lances can't touch her on enemy phase. Next unit we're going to talk about, she's also pretty easily available. I think she's kind of underrated. I've never built her, but I've seen this build before, and I imagine it works really well. Just give her a slaying weapon and upgrade it for resistance, and her resistance is going to be through the roof. Give her a good assist, give her, I would say Glacies, because it's going to give her a 3 cooldown count, and she's usually going to get doubled if you have a minus speed Florina. Even if she's neutral, her speed's fairly low. But if you want to go on the safe side, you could always go with Iceberg. That's still a guaranteed 20 damage if she's plus resistance. And if you're able, give her a distant counter. I mean, she wants to be dueling mages, so this is the best option for her. If not, you could always just give her resistance plus 3, let her tank mages, and then hopefully she can attack them on the next turn and not get dogpiled by a physical unit. It just puts her down immediately. Like I said, it's not the best idea, but if you don't have this encounter, then there's not much you can do there. And like I said, she's got low speed, so quick riposte is good. And given her high resistance, she can run attack and defense ploy to great effect. So she'll be taking 5 less damage and doing 5 more. Next unit I'm going to be talking about is Cecilia. And I mentioned the old Raven Tome users, and I figured she'd be a good one to talk about since she comes with a Raven Tome. So keep her Raven Tome and give her a good assist, and since she really isn't going to have any way to lower her cooldowns, and I would just give her a low cooldown special. She doesn't really have the defense or resistance to really utilize a defensive based special anyway. So give her Raven Tome, give her Triangle Adept, and give her the old Bow Breaker. This allows her to deal with most of your bow units, and any blue unit really. This is the build you typically see on Performing Indigo, and it's just a good meta check because it can take out Reinhardt and take out Brave Len. And if you're going to run her on a cavalry team, which is a good idea, just go ahead and give her the cavalry buffs. And maybe the distant defense seal to survive a little better. And the last unit I'm going to talk about is one that's really by no means common, but this is a build you can run on a lot of archers. So we have Halloween Jakob here. He's definitely one that benefits from the refinery giving us the guard bow upgrade. So I would give him that and just refine it for whichever of his stats is lower based on his IVs. Give him pivot because he needs the help getting around, and give him a special boost of whichever of his defense or resistance is higher. And the key here is Vengeful Fighter. If you give him that, then you can run a 4 cooldown special and you'll always have it ready on his second attack. I have distant defense on him, but you could always run a close counter on him if you want him to be able to handle close threats. He just can't handle them as well. If you're going to do that, I would also give him close defense as a Sacred Seal, just so that he has +6 to defense and resistance at all times. But if you want to make him specialized at handling ranged units, then stacking distant defense twice is great. And like I said, you could give him 3 if you want. I just had Deflect Magic on here so he can handle Reinhardt a little better. And I have Attack Ploy on him, but honestly, his resistance is high, but maybe not quite high enough that that's always going to be a good idea. I feel like a threat in here would work just as well. Or a Ward Armor if you're running him on an armor team. So yeah, that's my ideas for enemy phase teams, and I use them a lot because I would rather bait an enemy unit in than send one of mine out and hope that I can get them out of danger. So anyways, I hope you all liked this video. If you have any really strong enemy phase units you want to share, or any good strategies I might not have discussed, leave them in the comments. And if you have a good argument for why player phase units are just better, leave that too. Heck, I might learn something and start using them more. Either way, thank you all for watching, and I hope I'll see you in the next video. Bye guys.